Welcome to the studio of Himalaya Talk Show. I'm Binod Rijal. I had the privilege of meeting one of the authors, Gemini Wahhaj. She's from Houston, and she's recently written a book called The Children of the Madness. This book is a journey of a character from Bangladesh to the United States. Beautifully written. I'm going to have a conversation with her, and we will learn more about it. And also, the reason why I wanted to do this podcast with her was because I wanted people to know why people write what they write, and also what people are thinking about in today's world. So I hope you'll enjoy this. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. My name?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my name is Gemini Wahhaj, and I'm from Bangladesh, and I'm a Bangladeshi American, and I live in Houston right now.
Okay, and so I know you wrote this book, but what do you do professionally?
I teach at a community college, and I teach English.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. Is it like a creative writing or?
Creative writing less and less because there's less emphasis on arts. So yeah, creative writing, literature, composition.
Okay, very nice. So you're from Houston, so welcome to Dallas.
Thank
first of
you.
all. What I want to start with I had the privilege to read your book. I actually read it 2 times.
Thank you so much.
And you start your book with a beautiful quotation. It says, "We are the children of this madness. Let us be whatever we wish."
Right.
That's beautiful. And you said it was from Yusuf?
Yeah, from an Iraqi poet's poem, Saadi Yusuf. At a time when I was looking for a title. I didn't have a title. So it was really lucky that I came across this poem.
That's very catchy, and that basically got me to basically start reading, the first part of the story. So just tell me a little bit about that quotation and what it means to you, and how that particular quotation triggered for you to start writing this novel.
So I think it's from a larger poem. I wish I had the book with me. It's to his friend Adonis, and it's about how the whole history of Iraq and how there's always been sort of revolution and struggle and all the things that have happened, like from age-old history. And then he says, but we are the children of this madness. He acknowledges that long history of all the things that have happened, and then he says, let us be whatever we wish, which means that we could have a different tomorrow and we can be whatever. And it's a great ending because the whole poem is like, our families kicked us, the police kicked us, it's just full of all the suffering for centuries of suffering. And it's a really down poem, but it ends with that line, and I think it goes on a little bit more, but I loved that ending of the...
Yeah, because it basically, for me, it tells me that let's start an adventure which is based on how we decide to write our future versus what has been so far historically.
Right.
Because madness, to my understanding, is all the war and all this political conundrum that the Middle East went through, especially Iraq, Iran. I think that's what that's pertaining to, right?
No, when he is writing, I think he's writing about the end of the revolution. So in the 50s, Iraq was sort of had gone through a communist, not a communist revolution, like a countrywide revolution with every sector, and they'd overthrown the British.
Right.
So the British were in Bangladesh as well. They'd overthrown the British, and they had their own self-rule. And then Saddam Hussein comes in and overthrows the Iraqi government, and that's when he writes this. That's when he goes into exile.
Got it. Okay. So that is the foundation of this novel. But then coming back to the actual stories that you have, what fascinated me was you have several about 40 chapters.
I think I heard 50.
50. Okay. So each of these chapters, they have different place and different time.
Right.
You move from 2009. There was a chapter that had stories from 1967, somewhere in Montreal. And then you have a 2003, and then you have a present day story from Katie Houston.
No, it stops in 2003.
Okay.
Right.
So it has so much variabilities there. So just tell us about what prompted you to write stories on this spectrum of almost like 2-3 decades.
So I'm used to reading sort of, it's very hard to say what you're formed by, but I'm used to reading stories, or I was formed by reading stories that are sort of, I guess what you'd call the 19th century novel. Not the 19th century, I guess the 20th century novel, right?
Right.
And that's very like, you get engaged with a character and you follow that character. And through that character, you feel about society, about what's going on. And so for me, that character was Nasiruddin, who was born on the eve of the Second World War. And this is, the British, so it goes through from British colonization through the partition of India and Pakistan, through 1971, through like this is Bengali modernity, and this is a village boy who is sort of trying to be an ideal boy, and he wants to not be superstitious, not believe in ghosts or jinns. We have in Islam, we believe in a kind of ghost that's a jinn. Do you know what a jinn?
Genie coming out from the bottle?
And they don't come up from bottles. They're like evil spirits that could come and like sit on you if you're not careful. And it's a possession of a kind. And sort of like even moving away from a very deeply religious village community to science and rationality. And I wanted to follow that through one character. So even though it feels like, it's spanning ages and generations, I'm really simply following a simple story of this boy who has a dream, and he wants to make something of himself. And if you know Pather Pachali, the movie by Satyajit Ray, it's a trilogy, and it's almost the same story. So it starts with, like, he has a dream. He wants to make something of himself, and but life gets in the way and challenges him.
I was fascinated by some of the stories that you have written about your villages and the mud huts and the roofs. I grew up like that as well. So reading through your book, I actually found myself being a part of the character in that book. And I think that's one of the most powerful thing a writer can do, to make the readers feel like it's their story and not somebody else's. And as I was reading through the chapters about your grandmother, your uncles, your bua, which is your aunt, and when you had an accident and you bled your leg in one of the chapters.
It's fiction, though. I just want to be clear.
Right. But so those, even though they are fiction, they create this reality that everybody lives through growing up in places like Nepal or Bangladesh or India. So it's very catchy. But then what I was trying to tell you was the following chapter flips over to Binu, one of the other character who is in the United States, from what I understand. So you have this story happening in Bangladesh, and then it basically, the next chapter goes on a party. There's a party happening, and basically it goes back and forth. Is that how you intended the novel to be?
I did not. Like I said, I grew up reading novels that would just go on and on. Like, you're following this story of one person, a very heroic, romantic person. But when I was writing it in America, I was told again and again to write a dual narrative. So a dual narrative is that switching back and forth, which you also see, I think, in a lot of recent movies.
I do, yeah.
I can't, like the new Great Gatsby or the new Jane Eyre movie. So I think it's a very popular narrative structure. And I was told that, I think specifically because for an American audience, they would be much more interested in the person who's living in America and how America enters into the story. And so I didn't really have a story for that. And I want to write an immigrant novel, but this wasn't my immigrant novel. So, but I had to, over 20 years, I had to live in America and then come up with that American story. And now I have something to say about living in America.
Like I said, I read it twice because I found it very beautiful. Let's segue towards the use of language. You've basically used beautiful form of languages to your description about how the pigeons were, how the cows were. You've used so many imageries, similes, metaphors, that it really is beautiful to go through that. not only was I fascinated by the content, but also the use of words. I'm a great appreciator of epistemology. I like how you basically use words and say things that can be said. When you write something like this, do you basically delve into what is the best way to write this with the words and phrases and all the anecdotes I have in my my skill sets and my quiver, or does it just instantially comes to you when you're writing it?
I'm so grateful that you said that it you feel the place, because I was so worried that I was sort of writing it in English, I was making it seem artificial and cliched and stereotypical, that I was losing the actual village or the actual people I was writing about. Right? Like you could reduce them to something ridiculous. And so I was really afraid of that. When I first wrote it, I sort of wrote it in a lyrical way. And actually, my parents, I think, were visiting me in America then. And I had asked both of them to write their diaries because I thought they would not live very long. And they would just be writing. They're not good writers. And my mother is a better writer. But they would just be writing things, like very like in scribbles, like very bad writers. But they would just be like, oh yeah, this. I went to school here. I did this. And from that, I was sort of in a trance, and this would just come out of me.
Got it. Okay.
So when I wrote it, I'm in touch with that village, with the fish, with the scene I have with going fishing in the middle of the night when the fish actually come out. So I was very much in touch. But when I was revising it and I was trying to make it into scenes and make it like palatable for an American audience, so that I was switching to a sort of modern structure, I was so afraid that in that process of translating and explaining, I had lost. The
essence could have been lost. Any time during the novel, I didn't at all feel that was the case. I was very, like as I was telling you, using the same word again, it was impressive that you had the ability to bring the content in such a way that you could actually describe how a pigeon was making noise or cows were doing their things in the streets. So that's a skill set that very few people have when I write. And I'm a voracious reader, so I found that, and I was very intrigued by the way that you had used your vocabulary and how you basically got into me to bring my imagination forth.
Thank you.
So that was awesome. So as a writer, this is your first novel from what I understand.
In a while. I've written my entire life.
Right, exactly.
So maybe in this phase of writing.
And we'll talk about the novel that you're publishing in 2025. But in 2025, right?
Short stories. Yeah.
But for some aspiring writers that may be listening to this podcast, what would you want to tell, people who want to write and who think writing is a good thing to have, and why write in the first place? What is the purpose of writing, and why should anybody write or think about writing?
So first of all, idealistically, I write because I cannot not write.
Okay.
Because I did give up writing because as immigrants you struggle, and I hadn't really made headway. I wasn't able to publish, and then I thought my children are starving, and I'm not cooking for them because I'm so bent on my ambitions, and I stopped, and I couldn't. I was very unhappy not writing, and the way I process life is by observing. I mean, nobody wants to hear me and what my thoughts are, but I can put them in my fiction.
Got it.
And so that's the way I process the world, and it's impossible for me to not write. But the other part of it is very interesting because when I went to an MFA PhD program in creative writing. So when I did that, I thought, I have to have an agent, and I have to go through a big publishing house, and I have to be validated by others, which is what we think of as writing, right? Like we would write and somebody would say you're a brilliant, accomplished writer. And but before that, the comments would be like, I didn't really fall in love with your story, or your prose, your language isn't there yet. And you'd get these comments, and you'd start improving, and you'd try improving. And that's really a miserable way to approach writing. I think you should approach. I think I should approach writing, not for others, as I'm going to write, and this is a document I'm leaving for history, and it doesn't matter if one person reads it or two people read it, and if I don't write, then I'm not a writer. Does that make
It does. It's a pursuit that's the goal, and not goal the pursuit.
Yeah.
So you're. There's this philosopher, his name is Emil Cioran. He's a Romanian philosopher, and he wrote this book called The Height of Despair. And he says, if I don't write, I would kill myself. So he basically was so, he's an author, he's a very sad author, okay, very dystopic. And he said, I write because this avoids me from killing myself. So, and that's the kind of spirit that I think writers should, all writers should have, and not because it gets published and you'll have so many likes, but that's an amazing way to think about it.
Yeah, I just feel like I see things and I want to tell that story. Like that's how I experience the world. Like I can't go to a party and have a fun conversation with someone. I go to a party and I notice things and I want to write about, that,
Absolutely.
and that's what interests me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I was also telling you earlier that when I read your stories, these stories are based on like a generation that we grew up with. So if the new generation has to read this, there's so many reference points that they need to create. So the story for you and me, for me, I already have the foundation upon which I can understand the story. But for somebody like my child, for example, you have a son who's in
12 years old.
Seventh grade. I have a sixth grader. For them, they need the reference point, the predicates to make sense of the story. So it's a blessing for them because usually it's the foundation that gives a story, but for the kids of today's generation, the story can create a foundation for them, the other way around. So it actually is a very enlightening journey for them to learn up the story first and then basically understand what it was like back in the time when you and I were growing up. So that's the other beauty in this story, and I also noticed that. So tell us a little bit about your short story that you're looking forward to publish in 2025.
Not the novel, the short story collection. So I wrote them during the pandemic. And they're all based on Katy, or not Katy, but Houston and Texas. And all of the stories are about Bengalis living in Texas or Bengalis wanting to come and live in Texas. I really liked writing short stories, but concentrating them in that way thematically, because when you write story after story after story about one thing that you can't describe all at once, maybe the stories together are able to describe that.
Awesome. So I think I just want you to, any last words that you want to basically tell the audience or even me. I just want to, anything that's in your mind that is worth mentioning that I may not have covered or you may not have said so far.
No, I mean this was a great interview, and it's so nice meeting like literary circles, journalistic circles in America. I think that's great. I love it to find that people still read novels or people still read short stories and they enjoy it, and that means so much. It means so much to a writer to have literary magazines, to have it's not for fame, but it's just for that feeling, almost like a theater feeling. Hey, give me a piece of writing, and people reading every day, sort of a newspaper feeling. I don't know about Nepal. When I grew up in Bangladesh, I would write something in the newspaper, and everybody would read it the next day, right? And it just lasts a day because it's a newspaper. But that feeling of conversation, of being in not because you want to be famous or you want your work gilded, but just have talking to someone, and that's so much fun. The exchange of ideas. So this radio, this journalism, this kind of writing, all of that means so much for the soul. Yeah.
What 3 to 5 books would you recommend for people?
My favorite writers, I think Kazuo Ishiguro, I really love. He's a British writer, but sort of Japanese born. I really like his concepts. I like Mavis Galant's short stories, which is, I always start by reading her stories before writing, so that I get into that space of language. And now I'm reading a lot of Bengali novels because I think my foundational writing comes from Bengali novels. I'm really trying to go back there and almost hold myself to that honesty and integrity of like, can I reach this level, or like comparative.
Got it.
So
it's very aspiring.
yeah.
So thank you very much for gracing us with your presence
Thank
in
you.
our studio, and we hope next time when you visit Dallas-Fort Worth again, we should definitely do that, especially when you release your 2025 short story.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we'd like to do that again.
I'd love that.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. I would like to conclude this talk show, Himalayan Talk Show, with the same quotation I started with. We are the children of madness. Let us be who we wish to be. Thank you.
Thank you.